All right. So welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Sebastian Mahfood, and this is our second presentation featuring Dr. Vic Klimoski in our course on Catholic education, being taught in the fall of 2020 at Holy Apostles College and Seminary. Dr. Vic Klimoski is the former Director of Lifelong Learning at St. John's School of Theology and provides consulting services for the Benedictine Center of St. Paul's Monastery. He holds a doctorate in adult education from the University of Minnesota and works extensively as a group facilitator and project consultant. He is also author of a number of poetry collections, most recently Revisited, Gleanings, Margin Notes, Lamentation for the Word, and Natural Wonder. And on a personal note, I consider Vic to be one of my longest and dearest friends. It was Vic that got me into the business of consulting many moons ago, and provided mentorship and spiritual fatherhood, if I may, as I began to share with others the gifts that Vic was sharing with me. So with that, Vic, I'd like to introduce you to the class. There are a handful of people physically present, well, virtually present, and the remainder of the class will watch this after the fact via on demand on WCAT TV or WCAT Radio. So with that, Vic, it's all yours.
Thank you, Sebastian. Sebastian needed very little coaching or mentorship. He was like a rocket, you know, was being able to see that this was a talent, and he has taken off and done some wonderful things. And so to be a spiritual father is a great thing, because I take great pride in what he's been able to accomplish. Well, my task today is to offer you a perspective on adult learning. It is my field, it is my passion, it is a vocation, and so I'm very happy for this opportunity to do it. You know, I'm at that point in life where these opportunities to think about what I have learned over the course of my career are really important, and help to bring together some things. The sources that I'm going to draw on for you today as I put this together is, of course, my graduate work in adult learning at the University of Minnesota and St. Cloud State University. My career has been wonderful on so many different levels. I've been a teacher. I've been able to be a teacher over the past 35 years to a wide range of adult learners in a wide range of settings, including the back room of a bar in northern Minnesota. I have been, as Sebastian said, a consultant, and for a good number of years worked with faculties around the country on issues of teaching and learning. There was during the 90s, early 2000s, faculties were really interested in engaging questions about learning, and so I had some opportunities in like 35 schools, different schools, Catholic and Protestant, of sitting with faculties and listening to their stories and talking with them and learning with them about what it means to teach adults in these varied settings. And then my work as both Director of Lifelong Learning at St. John's I actually left that from 17 years as a seminary dean and in St. Paul, and then I went up the road to Collegeville, and it was a great transition for me because I worked with preparing people for ministry, and at St. John's I had a chance to work with people who were in ministry, helping them to draw upon again their learning and their experience. So that's my data pool. There are two sort of dynamic processes that have been instrumental to me as I've worked on this stuff, and that is reflection and intentionality. A lot of what happens, it seems to me, in educational research is best done not in a laboratory, but with working faculties and with learners. And so I've had those opportunities, and I've noticed that by paying attention, by really observing and listening and asking good questions, is that a tremendous amount of insight emerges from that. And as a teacher myself and as a leader of adult learning, it's not just reflecting on what happened and what I learned, but as a result of that, being far more intentional about how I design any learning experience, whether it's a one-night presentation or a day-long workshop or a semester-long course. Our agenda today is pretty compact. Sebastian gave me the almost insurmountable task of doing about a 20-minute presentation. And I'm trying to, I've been working very diligently at doing that. Again, at this point in life, I could probably go on for 2 hours and would bore everyone except myself. So that's a good discipline of what can I say in 20 minutes that can really offer you some ideas to think about, some questions to think about, that can be helpful to you as you continue to fulfill your vocation as teachers. And then after that, it is a conversation. It's a conversation based upon your questions of anything that I've said or offered as I do this sort of overview and this perspective. And then I'm always interested in hearing your observations, your reflections on your teaching, the things that impress you about this opportunity to sit with others and to look at a topic in depth and to explore it and to watch what happens when people bring their interest and curiosity and their knowledge to bear upon that. I've developed a short slide presentation mostly to give you an alternative to looking just at me. And there, okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is to ask you to do something, of course. And my reflections are going to be based upon these 4 different elements that I think are important aspect of adult learning, of any sort. And what I'd like you to do, just very quickly, you can do it in your head, you can do it on a piece of paper, is to put them in order of priority. When you think about your experience and your approach to teaching, where do you tend to put your primary emphasis?
Are you looking for a response, Vic?
No, I'm sorry. That would be something that I'll talk about later. This is just to get you thinking about, because I'm going to talk about these, and I want you to have some notion of how you prioritize them. Because I will show you now the model. So when I was working on this past week, and I did this, I thought, well, people might think, well, you know, you're too afraid to say which is the most important. But it is a genuine reflection of how I approach these 4 key elements. Is that if someone would say, well, what is the most important? I could not make a choice. Not because I am not able to, but it's because I have found that each of these are important. They're indispensable to what is always in service of learning. So, you know, there were debates that raged in my field about, are you teacher-centered or learner-centered? Are you content-centered? No, I'm all about learning. And to do that, I need to be mindful of these 4 elements so that I can do my best as a sort of a servant of learning, of helping others who gather with me to be able to bring to bear our gifts and our talents and our interests in for the sake of learning. So what I'm going to do is go through these 4 and pose some questions for you for your thinking, and then to help to structure our conversation. But let me begin with a definition that I created for this presentation, but you know, captures some of my convictions and what I think my own research has shown about adult learning. Learning is, first of all, an interactive process, as that students and teachers are there as partners, in pursuit of learning. And that, but it's interactive in this sense, is that the best research that I have seen over the years about how people, what people remember, how they really do what some theorists have called deep learning. It's something that goes into their neural network and they draw upon, is because they have engaged content in some way. There's not a prescriptive way of doing that. Doesn't mean that people can't listen to a good lecture and not be engaged, but there's a purposefulness about the interaction, about the engagement, because as people work with an idea, as they work with concepts, those concepts become part of them, they become part of their knowledge network. The other element I would hold up is this notion of the expertise of teachers. In the early literature in adult education, we talked about the teacher as a facilitator, and there was a notion that somehow if you taught, even if you use the language of teaching, of being a teacher, is that somehow you were changing the dynamic in the classroom and you had all the authority and the learners had none. Again, that's one of those futile discussions that I can't enter into. As a teacher, I have a responsibility to be an expert. I have expertise that I bring to the group. And it's expertise about knowledge, about an area, the area in which I'm talking about, that I know stuff, as it were. But it's also an expertise of how the process works. The way I structure an event, the way I guide it, the way I guide students, the interaction I have with students, the pacing, all the things that I'm going to talk about as this unfolds, that's part of my expertise. I am equipped to do it. I'm not just a dispenser of facts or a dispenser of expert knowledge. I know how this whole process works, and I bring that to bear for the sake of learning. This notion of building on learner knowledge and experience goes back to this reality is that no one is a blank slate, is that even somebody taking their first theology course, and when I was dean, I used to love interviewing first-year students because they really were, according to their own estimates, world-class theologians. But I think it does reflect the fact that we all have deeply held opinions. We create working theories, even when we don't talk about them as theories. We have ways in which we interpret and make sense of reality, and so those become our working theories. And then we have a network of ideas that impact how we receive and process information. All of that is part of the learning process. We need to build on that, not try to pretend it doesn't exist and that we're starting from scratch with people, but we're building on a foundation of knowledge that needs to be informed, enlightened, corrected, but that we are building. We are not simply introducing something for the first time. And we do that, I think, in two really important ways. One is challenging people's assumptions. This is part of the interaction engagement part of it, challenging the assumptions that people have. How do you know that is true is a wonderful question. When someone says, well, this is how it is, then how do we help them to begin to see the underlying assumptions of a conclusion that they've come to? And also the power of the question. The master teachers for me, who have been my best mentors, who have been the best models in my association with faculties, have been the people who are really good at asking questions, because it's in the asking of a really good question that people began to move past their biases and their limitations and begin to embrace new information. And then this last aspect of the definition about equipping people for making applications. One of the things that we've noticed, especially in research on adult learning theory, is that the notion that this characteristic of wanting to see how it works, how can I use this? It's not gross pragmatism, but it is about how does what I am learning impact who I am, how I am, and what I do. All right. So let me go through these the four circles, these four elements quickly, and I've tried to frame the major points in terms of questions. So when it comes to about content, these are things that seem to me to be pretty regular in how I go about this, how I go about my work, and how other very skilled teachers of adults go about their work. One is determining what the learner needs to know, and in a sense, it's a type of scaffolding. How do we take a body of knowledge that we're going to cover in a course or in a workshop and figure out what we need to do so that people have a way of progressively moving forward into an idea. And sitting back, it's part of the work we do with outcomes. Those of you who have been engaged in this wonderful work of outcomes assessment, but of creating outcomes, what does the learner need to do? Because there is not an infinite amount of time or space to do everything. And so we have to make some decisions. And we make those decisions in a way that progressively moves people deeper and deeper into a topic area. The second aspect of that is about the importance. Why is it important to the learner? And this has to do with motivation. How do we tap the motivation that brings a student to the study of a particular topic? I don't care if it's a required course or not. There's a motivation there to do something more than just sit blankly before a screen or in a classroom and take down information. And so thinking ahead about why this is important to the learner, why it should be important to the learner, helping the learner to identify for herself or himself why it's important, is a way of really tapping into the power that motivation plays in disposing adults to move into new learning. The third question is, how does it connect to learner, I got to move something here, learner knowledge and experience? Again, refers back to that notion that we are working with people who bring incredible experience and knowledge to a learning event. It may not be specific to this particular class in Bible or church history, but it is knowledge that is important to them, and it is experience that has shaped them. And the extent to which I can build a bridge between the content that I'm going to be advocating and bringing to them and what their life experience and their knowledge teaches helps to enrich the overall learning that will happen. And then, of course, you'll see this a number of times. I need to think, as I'm putting together a course, how might the learner apply it? And again, it's not about building something. Application has very broad use. How can the individual use it as they think about their lives, as they think about the work that they do, as they think about their relationships, right? How they think about the next course they're going to do. The application factor helps them to realize that this is not just a theory, but that it has vital importance for the practices that they'll be under. So then we go over to the learner and thinking about the learner. And in my work, I do quite a bit of work with the Blandin Foundation here in Minnesota with leadership education for small town rural areas. And one of the things in designing learning for the foundation, a key question has always been, what do they bring to this learning experience? And it's a good reminder again, is that we're not working at a blank slate, but that what do they bring? What are they bringing? It may have nothing to do with the course that I'm designing or the workshop I'm putting together, but they are bringing something that is important to them and therefore can be very important to me as I build bridges between what we're going to do and what they are doing and what they know. This is probably the easiest one to do, is to hear what questions they have at the start of learning. It's been most intriguing when I was doing the MDiv integrative seminar at St. John's College when I was on staff. Spending the first night just listening to asking what questions they have as they consider the various topics that they took on for this integrative process was really intriguing, and it really helped me then to tailor what I was going to do. Making sure that I connected with their questions, because their questions are one of the are the things that dispose them to both the reception and the processing of new information. This third question, how do they prefer to process new ideas, refers to all the learning styles, material that's out there, and it is legion. I realize it is legion. And what I do when I'm working with new teachers or new trainers is say you don't have to be an acrobat to try to do all the different learning styles, but it's to be mindful that people have different ways in which they prefer to receive information. Some love to sit and listen and hear a really good presentation. Others really need to be involved in small group discussions or, God forbid, learning games that I've learned to appreciate, but which I loathe personally. But it is a way. I had a friend who is just a brilliant historian. He was reading this book that was popular at the time, and I said, "What do you think of it?" And he said, "I could not understand what he was writing about until I diagrammed it. And once I could see it, I could understand it." All right. So we have all that variability going on. It is being mindful of that and trying to vary the variety of ways in which we present information and we have people process information. Because I have a preference does not mean that's the only way I can learn. It just means it's a preference. And I can try other things as long as once in a while I can come to hearing a good lecture. And then this last one is, what know-how do learners need in order to complete a task? I'm going to give you just a quick example from one of the consultations I did with the faculty. I worked with this faculty for a year. So I had a chance to go back every other month to work with them. And early on, as I was listening to their stories about what frustrated them and what were the things that they wanted to do with this seminar and teaching, this faculty person who taught moral theology said, he said, I have been doing this for 15 years. And he said, I assign what I think is the easiest assignment of doing a critical essay on a topic that's a moral topic that's of interest to them. And I am just underwhelmed by the results. So I said, well, tell me, so what is a critical essay? And, he kind of stopped in his tracks. It's like, you're the facilitator, you should know this. But he started breaking it down. He broke it down and I said, well, what do they do first? And so he did that. He fooled around with that. And then we moved on. I came back maybe 2 months later, and the first thing you do is always a checkup. And I said, what have you noticed that has improved since you've been more intentional about what you're doing and more observant? And this guy, the same person said, I took what we did a couple months ago and I really sat down and I really thought about what instructions I could give someone who's never written a critical essay so that they could do it step by step. He said, I did it. And he said, I've never had better quality work. And he said, not just from the students who, always do good work, but from students who didn't have a clue. They would put stuff together, they were bright enough, but they just didn't know how to do a critical essay. So that's the know-how. We tend to say, we'll say, get into discussion groups and talk about. I very seldom do that anymore. I use discussion groups, but I have very clear instructions about what should happen. Otherwise, people feel that they're sort of just shooting the breeze with no purpose, no end, but to chew up class time when the teacher should be earning his or her pay. When it comes to teacher, what I would point out with this is, I'm writing a book now. Well, we're done with the book and we're polishing. We're in that polishing phase. That's so painful. It's called Powerful Training. But our focal point is that we teach from the inside out, right? We teach by being aware of who we are and what we know about ourselves as a learner, as well as how that impacts who we are as a teacher. And so these questions are just a few that I keep, I think are important. One are my learning preferences. So I've said just a little while ago, I prefer lecture. I prefer to be in a classroom or in a setting where somebody makes a really well-designed, well-thought-out presentation. But I also realize after 35 years is that not everybody finds that same way of learning to be dynamic for them and a way to engage it. So I have to be aware that I need to stretch myself and to design things that as a learner I might not readily say amen to, but that I know can have a benefit for others. The second question is, what are my convictions about teaching? And I noticed that as Brother Owen last time talked about about encouraging you to have a philosophy of education. It is being clear, being explicit, writing them down. What are your convictions about teaching? And I would say teaching and learning, so that you and I have never worked with a faculty in which, when that question was asked, people couldn't respond to it. They may not have a completely well worked out a PowerPoint presentation on it, but there are certain convictions about teaching that are important, very important to know, to recognize, to challenge, to question, so that I know that what I am doing is connected to something that is fundamental to how I think about my vocation as a teacher. The other related question is, what assumptions do I have about students? Some of that is who they are in terms of, I suppose, a power dynamic. Some of it's about styles, preferences. But one of the things that I think we underestimate is that, especially for adult students, is that they need to have a sense of respect, that we have a respect for them as learners on a journey. We don't expect them when they come into a class or a workshop to be a finished product, but we do have respect for what they know and how they know. We have respect for their questions, even when their questions are, they're just forming as they're forming them as they ask them. But we have to think about what we think of the students and who they are and what our relationship with them is in this dynamic environment in which learning is our ultimate goal. The last question is one that was raised very early when instructional technology became a hot topic, especially for the Association of Theological Schools. And I was a very astute professor at Luther Seminary, and I was talking to him about how he was getting his faculty past the wall of resistance on using technology in the classroom. And he said what he noticed is that faculty increasingly asked a question about, where do I stand in the classroom? Had nothing to do with physical space, but it had to do with, what's my authority and what's my role and responsibility when I don't walk into a classroom, go to the front of the room, stand at a podium, and deliver a brilliant lecture. And so, where do I stand in the classroom is connected to my convictions about teaching, correct? I mean, it is, okay, so what is my role here? And how do I honor that role by doing what I am called to do, and at the same time working with students so that their best selves can be present to this experience of learning together. And finally, we get to context. And context issues have been escalated because we are on this machine now, right? I mean, but they've always been important, it seems to me, at least in my work, being very mindful of the instructional environment and the emotional environment. I'll quickly talk about instructional environment because I want to end my part of this, talking about emotional environment. The instructional environment is being conscious of how you use the space, and whether it's a Zoom situation like this or it's a physical classroom, how is it configured? How does the layout convey what in fact we are about and facilitate the sort of learning that we are encouraging occurs there? The idea of technical facility, again, whether it's using Zoom or it is using machinery in the classroom, is that it runs in the background. It is not the focal point. So that we have that sense that everything is controlled by technology. No, everything is controlled by our quest for learning. And technology is a tool, it's a resource that's there. And so part of our attendant to the environment is that we become as adept at using it as we can, and trying to ensure that we can use it as flawlessly as we can, and to realize that there will be glitches. And so that it's not about being perfection. It's about being able to make sure people are comfortable that when it doesn't work perfectly, no one will actually die. And so that doesn't become an obstacle. We become helpful to one another. One of the groups I work with talks about helping one another in this new technological age. And it's wonderful when you're working, teaching online, is that if you don't know what the problem is or how to fix it, there's someone in the group that can. Use of another issue in the instructional environment are the opportunities for interaction. How can I use this space to give people opportunities to have significant encounter with others and to have a significant conversation with others about the topic. And then the final one is about rhythm and pacing. I took an online course, 8-week course, a march to hell, I would say in retrospect. And one of the reasons I had a negative reaction to it was on Zoom, it's 2 hours, is that almost every session, it was a team, a male, female team, the guy would say, yeah, we're going to give you stuff in a fire. This is all going to be fire hose. But, you know, over time, you'll figure out what we're talking about. And I'm sitting there as an adult educator saying, why would you tell me that you're going to overwhelm me with data, with information, and that somewhere along the line, I'm going to sort it out? Rhythm and pacing says, I've got an hour. I've got to do this. I can do this in an hour. I can't do all the rest of it. I'm going to have to make some very hard choices for the sake of learning. And then pacing is not just about breaking up people and breaking into small groups. It's providing space. There is nothing wrong with pausing and asking people to reflect for 5 minutes. It's a long period of time. And if that makes you uncomfortable, you can make it a minute. But a chance to reflect, chance to write, a chance to step out of what's going on and really having some space to process it. That's what I mean by rhythm and pacing, is to see that it's not just a sort of a straight line, not the fire hose. The fire hose is a great negative image of it. I just turn on the fire hose, I give you stuff, and you're impressed that I know all this, but it really doesn't contribute to our ultimate goal, which is learning. And then finally, this emotional environment. Oops, sorry. There's some things that provide a climate that dispose people to learning, to bringing their best self, their best skills, their most openness. And these are the ones that I believe the literature affirms, but my practice says make a strong contribution. One is creating, is this notion of hospitality, but of creating a sense of welcome. One of the interesting pieces of research that was done quite a while ago, but I have been verifying it all these years, is that in a group of adult learners, there's always going to be one, and there's more than one, who is going to say, I'm not going to say much because I'm probably the one person who shouldn't be here. Everybody else I've heard from is smarter than I am, and their backgrounds are more interesting. And so attending to those welcoming functions when a class gets started and being attentive to that as a class unfolds, again, whether online or in person, is really important to provide a place where people know that they're welcome, that how they see the world, that the questions that they have, the perspectives that they bring are unique to them and that they're valued by the group. Connected to that in a way is the question of safety, is that if in fact asking questions, of hearing ideas and working with ideas, and then to be able to ask a question as a learner that's not quite perfect. I had a faculty colleague when I was a dean who told his classes regularly, I could not break him of this, you may ask a question, but make sure it's properly phrased. He never told them how it was to be properly phrased. It was, he didn't want questions to interrupt his lecturing. If people feel intimidated, if they feel that they're going to be shamed, if they feel they're going to be somehow put down, they're not going to ask their questions. And very often in their questions, even when they're in process, they're not quite there yet, but they're getting towards it. If they can do that, magic happens in the sense that, you hear the question, you help them to make sure that you're hearing it, and it breaks open to a new level of learning. And we don't do that. I don't do that. I don't know about those of you who are listening to this or in this session, how you do that, but I don't do that if I don't feel safe. If I don't feel that somehow I'm going to be respected, that I'm processing something, and I really need I need a response from you. The third for this emotional environment, the third idea is this clarity of expectations. Okay, and it's about the course, it's about the standards of performance, what's going to be expected to me, and one of the things, it took me a long time to come to this, is that sometimes I would lay out expectations and I would say, well, I'm not going to say that. This would be the planning phase. I'm not going to say that because these are all adults and they know what to expect. No, they don't. No, they don't. And so err on the side of being very, very clear about what the expectations are, because then people have a chance to make sure that they're clear and that they can respond, gives them confidence, gives them that sense of safety. And of course, this other one, norms for participation, it's the same thing. There are people, that, there are people who in a course feel very comfortable asking a question or joining a conversation and being in a discussion, bringing in an idea, bringing in resources. And so having some established norms for conversation before a class begins, before a course begins, it just simply works wonders. And where it works has the best effect, in my experience, is having some norms about conflict. I almost always say, in our time together, we're not going to always agree. We're going to see the world differently. We're going to have different opinions, different perspectives on this. And so that's perfectly fine. And when we disagree with one another, we ask more questions. We seek to really understand why the person who is saying something with which I disagree is saying it. We practice mutual respect. We practice good listening, whatever it is. But I have found that the disruptiveness that often happens when you don't do that, when you don't talk about what happens when we disagree, because when people disagree in a class about something, we're tapping into their emotions, right? They're tapping into something. They have a passionate belief in this. And someone is saying, I don't share that, or I don't see it the same sort of way. And having some norms for how we're going to process that really makes it a learning conflict and conflict of ideas, a learning experience. And then finally is about feedback and evaluation. I don't care how old a student is. They always worry about whether or not they're doing well enough and what they need to do to get an A. And I don't mean to trivialize that, but I think people should know what the measures will be for evaluating their work. I have become a real fan of rubrics. I'm doing some work now for a small university, correcting college English compositions. And I'm an editor, and so I enjoy doing that. But what's been very helpful is that I have clear sets of rubrics for each assignment. And so and the students know these, I know them. And so when I give feedback, I have a structured way of giving feedback, and they understand, though they may not agree with the response of it. But when people don't know, when they're on edge about how am I going to be evaluated? What do I need to do to pass this class or to be successful in this? It puts a barrier to their being fully present because they're worrying about how that is. So that's it. I would come back just to make this point, is that I think these four elements are important. I think there are areas in which, as we reflect upon what we're going to do as we design a course or a workshop, reminds us of some things we need to pay attention to. And it is all in service of this idea of learning, is that's what we're about as teachers. That's what we are about as learners. And when we form this temporary intellectual community, it is our goal and purpose. So I was going to set my phone to time me, and I have a feeling that yes, I did more than 20 minutes.
You did great. That is, I personally am speechless. However, that won't last for long.
No.
But I know that we have some questions from the group, and I'll give them the first dibs on it. Father Peter just posed a question. Father Peter, do you want to voice that question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, great. So is it appropriate to incorporate short moments of, I really like what you said about pacing. And then I thought, you know, I often have the fire hose approach without knowing it consciously, but now I know it consciously so I can do something about it. It's just because I just want them to get as much information as possible. And then sometimes I speak too quickly because the time is running out. So I'm going to work on that. But now you're able to name it. It was fire hose approach, and it was that image that really struck me. Thank you.
Okay.
Is it appropriate, without making it into being too pietistic in our approach to teaching, to incorporate short moments of reflective prayer in a classroom setting, both for my sake and the students? I don't have to tell them that it's for my sake, but I want them to know that this is a time for you to process the information in the way that is most suitable for you. And just like a minute, I was thinking maybe every 15 minutes, because I'm now teaching scripture, is every 15 minutes, everyone should have their Bible, reflect what we said, or after I cover a section, just for a minute, and then we can go on. Is that acceptable academically speaking?
I think it's very acceptable from a learning point of view. It gives you, because you're accomplishing two things. You're giving people a chance to step back, take a breath, right? You're asking them to, in a sense, do some of the application. What does this mean to me? What's standing out? What questions are rising for me? How does this relate to who I am as a believer, right? So I think it's not just a moment of reflection, but doing that as a reflective prayer. I think that is appropriate to theological education, and I think it provides a very good point for people to do that, pausing, thinking about what this means, so that when they come back to it, because what I would encourage you to do is to as you try this, after a while, is to pay attention to what happens after these moments of reflection, of whether or not people seem to be more engaged, what happens to their questions, and so forth. No, I think it's a great practice.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reminded, do you remember Jim Rafferty? Used to be in theological education in the early days. He served as an educational technologist in the 5 schools in Minneapolis-St. Paul area when the first Lilly Grant came out, and those schools pooled their resources. He used to call drinking from a fire hose an instance of anapulstrophobia, which is a fear of not covering all the material.
Oh yeah.
So he suggested that material that couldn't be covered in the class be offloaded in some creative way, and one way would be that classroom flipping that we heard so much about 5 or 6 years ago, where the students have access to the lectures outside of class, and then when they come to class, the teacher actually has the space and the time to engage them more meaningfully, because he's not worried, or she's not worried about missing material and not covering all of it. What do you think about? I know that we talked earlier. The mode isn't what we're a slave to, but to use appropriate methods in any given learning experience.
You know, the cover of the material concern has been with us, I suppose, forever. I know a faculty member who one time told me, well, I know the students aren't reading the assignments, and so I tell them what they were supposed to have read. And I think that would create a sense of panic in me, as if I thought that I had to cover the book or the articles or whatever the reading list was. that I had to do that, then I had really no time to process it with him. So I think that this notion of having students take their responsibility, because part of it is that where I talked about the role and responsibility of the faculty member, too often we take the responsibility off the students. If in fact students are coming together with an expert, a knowledge expert, and they've heard a lecture, or they have done the reading and they have had an assignment to somehow process that time with the expert is lush, right? Because they can begin to ask questions, and he can begin to bring things together and to emphasize things that maybe nobody gets, or realizes that he or she does not have to cover something because everybody does get. And so there's not one methodology or one technique or one practice that is magic. I think there are some really good questions, but any approach that we use, always in service of learning. Are we helping students engage the material in a way that it goes from just, isn't this wonderful, to this is indispensable to how I see the world, how I frame the world, how I interpret it.
Now, as theological educators, it's not just to us and what we do with our priestly formation candidates, for instance, or with religious sisters, or with our Master of Arts in Theology students. It's not just academic coursework necessarily. There's also a bit of formation involved, especially if you look at the ATS standards, which require some formation. Is there a particular goal that we as theological educators have because of that formational dimension that, say, university professors may not have? Is there something else we should be looking for?
Well, what I took away from my work with people who are doing formation, and some formation that I did as well, it was all about the quality of relationship, right? It's the quality of relationship. It is being able to establish a relationship with someone in which they feel seen, they feel recognized. And that opens up then areas for conversation and reflection that otherwise may remain closed, but it's just that we meet on this plane, but it's only about ideas. For me to know you, I need to know you. I need to see you. I need to be able to hear you. I need to hear you say dumb things. I need to hear you say things that aren't really well considered. Because in that process, I can help you then, by asking questions, by helping you to get underneath some of your assumptions, I can help you to expand with that. I'm sort of blathering on, but I do think it is. I think in a theological education, for a theological educator, it is about the effort to develop and sustain quality relationships, because the study of theology is a soulful act, right? It's a very tender act. It is going to the core of who I am. And I can't think of any faculty member that I've ever worked with who does not want students to engage that seriously, thoughtfully, prayerfully, who wants it to become more than just idea, that they're very smart and they can recite the answer. They want the answer to be transformative. And that's not going to happen just by having information. It's about knowing that there is someone who is really concerned that I'm doing more than just getting the right answer, but that I'm thinking deeply about what that answer means for who I am as a person. Does that get close to a response?
It does. Well, the real takeaway there is relationship. Father Michel Legault, who taught philosophy at Holy Apostles for a very long time, used to always say, if you want to teach John Latin, you must first know John.
Perfect. I have a colleague at St. Paul Seminary who especially in the era we were getting a lot of students who were getting more and more reactionary. And she said what she would do when a student would be in her face, you know, telling her she wasn't Orthodox, wasn't a real nun, all that sort of stuff, is that she would say this mantra, what will this person help me to see that I can't see? And I thought it was, and she practiced what she preached. And I saw her do that with students who would be angry, or students who were just so sure that they were right and she was wrong, is that in her head she was saying, okay, I need to listen because I might learn something here. I can learn something here. And her other lesson to me was that you can't teach them unless you love them. It doesn't mean they're your best friend or you go out for a beer with them. You just have to be able to develop that sense of affection for someone who's on the journey. They're dependent upon you in a way to make progress on that journey, and to hold them in respect and affection.
And their dependence on you may be the reason why they push against you if there is tension in that relationship.
Yeah.
You know, they've got their own pride, and they want to be able to demonstrate a certain level of autonomy that learning may not allow them to demonstrate, I guess. And I don't know how I'd make sense of that, but that's one of those off-the-wall statements, perhaps, that you would be able to tease out of me through appropriate questioning.
Well, you know, I'm given to having strong opinions about something. And I remember talking with a young faculty member, and I was going on about something that was happening in the church. And he said, and he listened to me very kindly, and he said, I don't think you're seeing all the sides of this. And so he didn't say, you're going off on a tear. He said, I don't think you're seeing all sides of this. And he offered me one or two other pieces of information that actually made me realize that I really had come to I don't want to say a false conclusion, but an inadequate conclusion. And so he did that because, you know, he wanted to have a relationship with me as I wanted with him. And because there was more work to be done, right? There's more work to be done. And so the flip response we give to a student who's being sassy, or flip himself or herself, who's being indignant, you know, we can win that war. We can put them in their place, but we haven't built that relationship that says, take a risk. Ask me the difficult question. Tell me what your assumption is. Tell me what your conclusion is. Tell me why you think your opinion is golden, because I'm going to receive it. And I'm going to help you think about it. I'm going to think with you about it. You know, we all, hopefully, have had those sort of teachers in their lives. I probably have had, I think real quickly, maybe 3. And they made all the difference in the world in terms of my intellectual development, and in one case, my spiritual growth. You know, it is that this one, it was one of my faculty teachers at St. John's when I was a seminarian a couple hundred years ago. And I'd bring my questions to him, and he would just ask me 100 questions before he would tell me that I was full of beans. You know, he just had a way of helping me to think it through and to position what I knew and then find out what I didn't know. Those are wonderful, and I think that's how good formation happens, as I understand it, and I think that's how good intellectual development happens, at least from my experience as well.
Well, let's ask, we still have a little bit of time, which is enough for me to ask another couple of questions, but let's see if there's anybody else in our group who has anything to ask. I know we've got others in the room. This is what I call the graduate pause.
That's it. Thoughtful moment of reflection.
That's right. Okay, so I've got one, and if somebody else has something, feel free to jump in. So Malcolm Knowles came up with an idea of adult learners that he actually got from Alexander Kapp, who proposed the term andragogy back in 1833. And he said that he was drawing a distinction, which is what philosophers do, between the way in which children learn and are taught and the way in which adults learn and are taught. And he came up with ultimately five assumptions of adult learners. He said they've got a particular self-concept, they've got a particular adult learner experience, so an experience of adult learners, they got a particular readiness to learn, a particular orientation to learning, and a particular motivation for learning. And he said, really, these four of these are common to both the adult and the child. The adult happens to have a longer run of experience than the child has. All of us at Holy Apostles are engaged in the art of the possible, the art of teaching adult learners who themselves may be teaching children in high school or in elementary school. They may be future catechists who will teach small children about their faith. Is there anything that we teachers of teachers, I guess that would make us master teachers, is there anything that we need to know about any of these five assumptions that would be helpful to us in the courses that we're teaching today?
Yes would be the simple answer. Yes, there is. I want to go back to your preliminary point, and I will respond to that. I
Sure.
do think that a lot of time and energy was wasted trying to fight the battle of pedagogy versus andragogy, because I do think that there is crossover. That I would still say that I'm always concerned about good pedagogy, and that my audience is adults, and so andragogy is a way in which I broaden that. I think there's a sixth principle that's attributed to Knowles that wasn't on your list, and it's that adults want to be respected, and I'm going to use that as my leverage point. Sure. Because I'm just looking at my list here, because they are self-directed or have a penchant for self-direction, knowledge, experience, goal-oriented. They want to be recognized as an individual. They're not just a student in a herd of students, but they are Jack or Joan, and they are coming to this with a wide variety of motivations. And I think that we've always known from pedagogical research that individual attention, that responding to the individual, of taking individual variables into control, has a positive correlation with what they learn and what they retain. And so as you work with primarily adult students, treating them that way and making sure that they understand is that you recognize them as an individual, hopefully will help them as they work with youngsters who need that same sort of experience. And I've got 4 grandsons, and they are wonderful and beautiful and complex human beings. And the thought that one of them would get lost in a classroom of 30 is distressing to me, especially for one who needs a lot more attention. And so being aware that even under that terrible environment where you have 30 second graders, I mean that somehow we have to always be mindful that if we are true to our vocation as teachers, this is not a herd of second graders. This is a group of people, and these people have names, and they have histories, and they have families, and they are there because together we are going to make some things happen. I just think that my success in my work has been by effort and maybe by disposition, is that I have always tried to make people feel that I am present to them and that I am concerned about them, not the big corporate them, but I'm concerned about them. And it has invariably over time has had a positive impact. As soon as it's part of the herd, I think, then it becomes routinized and people drift.
So it's not like a classroom of 30 is a bunch of containers waiting to have content dumped into them.
Right.
They're unique and unrepeatable human persons who have their own goals and motivations, and even if they're young, they've got their own experiences, however those experiences may be. Yeah. So it really comes down to relationship.
Well, I'm reminded about Father Peter's idea about having these moments of just of reflective prayer. That is that in that process, the individual in himself or herself is beginning to understand that this is not something, a plate being just a table being spread, but that they're being invited into something. And that's why we pay attention to things like rhythm and pacing. And that's why we pay attention to creating an environment, an emotional environment that's welcoming and supportive and clear, is that this is an invitation into something. You're not just getting your ticket punched.
Anybody else would like to build off that? Well, the faculty who receive this will have something that they can take away in that sense of relationship, in that sense of engagement. With which we're dealing, in what it is that you're presenting. In my time as a teacher of adult learners, and this is, I started in 1994 in North Africa, so I've been teaching in higher education for 26 years. There's never been an encounter or a semester where I haven't learned how to deepen in some way a sense of a relationship or a sense of engagement with a particular group or a particular student within the group or whatever. I think that is a lifelong learning kind of thing. Perhaps if it weren't, 15 or 20 years ago, I would have said, okay, I know everything, or I've mastered the art. Yeah. And so if I understand what you're saying, we as educators can continue to grow and improve in our relationships, in the way in which we approach our relationships, in the insights that we have in terms of getting our mind around the whole picture of something.
Absolutely. The best teachers I know are the ones who always say to me, or by their behaviors, I think I can do this better. I think I can do this better. They're always learning. They're always paying attention. So I come back to my opening when I said that, my two research points are reflection and intentionality. Of paying attention to what's going on, of reflecting on what's going on, and then letting that inform my practice, realizing that I'm not looking for something that I cast in concrete, but that I will practice this until I learn something new that says I will change. I will change. There's a flexibility into that. We never have to prove that we're smart as teachers. We're certified. We've got PhDs and credentials that say we're smart. And so the notion that we try some things and they don't work, that we try some things and we build upon them, that we experiment and see whether or not there are ways in which we can be more effective, does not say that we don't know what we're doing. It says that we are always trying to do what we do better, right? We always try to do it. And I think that modeling that a faculty member does and how they do that, how they show, they show their work in the sense that I'm going to try this, or we're doing this, or this is why we're doing this. I think that's great modeling for people, that there's somehow not a path of perfection that only a few chosen few can follow. We are all on the journey. We're all on the journey towards learning.
And it sounds very invitational that you're inviting the other person into the process of learning, rather than trying to hand them a product that's already been put together and into a consumable unit for them, perhaps.
It's good. Yeah, it's a very good way of putting it. That's right.
Well, Vic, this has been incredible. And I want to thank you so very much for being here with us today. We've reached the end of our time. Okay. I didn't open us in prayer because I was too concerned about the transparency of my technologies. They were going kind of wonky at the beginning of this conversation. But could I call upon somebody to close us with a prayer?
I can close with prayer if you'd like.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father Peter.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, help us to become better educators, and help us also to approach education not just spreading something on a table, but inviting them to engage, to have an encounter, and ultimately an encounter with truth with you, Lord Jesus. We ask this through the communion of all the saints. Amen.
Amen.
Thank the Father,
Thank you.
and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Excellent.
Amen. Thank you, Father Peter. And thank you, Dr. Klimoski. That was
Thank you.
truly great. Thank
Wonderful
you so very much.
invitation.